All right, this is our rhetoric lecture and writing lecture for this week. And again, like I promised, I will try to make this as quick as possible, as painless as possible. Um, so I'm going to talk about two things today: what's called critical reading and basic appeals. And when you hear the word critical reading, you might think, it has kind of a negative sound, almost like something bad, but it's really not. Critical reading is really just all about asking good questions while you're reading. And so I'm asking you to read some short stories, read some articles for your journals. And so these are places where you can kind of apply this idea of critical reading. The other thing we're going to talk about is what's called basic appeals. And these are just ways to persuade someone, ways to, and guess what? They're not brand new. I didn't come up with these. These go back to ancient Greece, so a couple thousand years old, but actually still effective if you use them in the right way. So if you've been in my class before, some of this may be a bit of a repeat because we've talked about ethos and pathos and logos, and those are those old Greek concepts, again, like I said, that I think are still very effective today. All of this falls under the heading of academic reading, things that we do in reading. And so for the basic appeals, when you're reading somebody else's work, you may be thinking, how are they trying to persuade me? And noticing that can really make you a better reader and able to comprehend and understand more as you read. This critical reading part also is part of that as well. So there's a couple things, annotation and logical fallacies, we'll cover later, but I just wanted to mention them because they're all under that same heading of academic reading. And this is the big, out of all four of these things, this is kind of the majority of stuff that we're going to look at throughout the semester that may help you, improve as an academic reader. And reading academic stuff is, of course, different than reading other things. So these are specific skills to academics. All right, so this first thing that I wanted to mention, again, is this idea of critical reading, and then also the idea of, analyzing a text, looking at a text and breaking it into pieces to understand it better. So critical reading, like it says here, is not about finding fault, but it's just about asking good questions. So if you're reading something and you're in your mind, you're kind of questioning it. Some of us are just very naturally very skeptical or even cynical, sometimes we might say. And guess what? As an academic, that's a good thing. Being, kind of questioning like, I don't know, that doesn't sound right. Now, others of us can be kind of naive at times, and that can be, something it's not so good in academic reading and writing. You don't want to sort of take it, what people say at face value or with a grain of salt. You want to dig a little deeper. And that's what I mean by asking good questions. The thing is, the good news is a lot of people do this already on a daily basis, and you just kind of have to look at that. And then if you're not doing it with your reading for academics, you take some of those things you're already doing in normal everyday life. Like, for example, in different contexts, different situations, you might be reading a friend's text and, you're sort of like, they want me to come over tomorrow afternoon. And they didn't say, is it something, I wonder if something's going on or, so even just reading a text, you might sort of read between the lines, we call it, right? And try to figure out, are they trying to persuade me to do something? Is there something I should know about, et cetera, et cetera. Yeah, let's say you have a niece or nephew, or even if you have kids, and you've all heard like these excuses before when something gets broken, something happens, and they're saying, "Oh, I didn't have anything to do with that." And if you're very, critical in the good way, you kind of think about their excuse and think, does that really hold water? Does that make sense? You're watching a movie and you might be asking yourself, is this plot really believable? Again, all these are the same kind of thing. You just would take those kinds of questioning things that you normally do in your life and use them to improve your reading comprehension or your reading understanding. And so as you're reading, instead of just saying, well, this guy wrote this textbook, or this is the professor, or this is a news story, so it must be 100% true. Instead, you're sort of turning that and you're saying, I wonder if this is true. I don't know, this doesn't sound good, and if you have that kind of, what do we call that? There's an initial BS, right? Detector, some people call that, right? You can just sort of sense when some people call that street smarts, right? So some people have that. And again, if you're doing that in your regular life, it's something you can really easily apply to improve your reading comprehension by asking good questions. And that's really what I'm mainly talking about here with critical reading, and the textbook mentions this as well. Textual analysis, and oh, by the way, this is all in the Harbrace book, our Harbrace Essentials textbook, pages 30 to 31. And if you want to look at it, it'll give a little more detail than, or it'll cover it in a slightly different way than I am right now. Textual analysis is just so you have a text, whatever it is, you're reading a short story, Edison, New Jersey by Junot Diaz, right? And so it's a way to recognize and evaluate how others try to influence you. Even in a short story, they're trying to influence you. But especially in nonfiction, if you're reading an article, maybe it's trying to persuade you about some topic in a newspaper or something like that. But even in fiction, like our short stories, but definitely when you're reading like the article about predicting premature births, which is the one for this week, you can really try to evaluate how they're trying to influence you if they are trying to persuade you of something. A way to help you understand how you can influence others. So textual analysis not only helps you figure out, okay, this person's trying to say something to persuade me or influence me in some way, but then you can turn that around and you can use those same strategies to try to persuade somebody else in your own writing, which of course you have to do when we're writing essays. It's applicable, this idea of when you say textual analysis, you might think, oh, it's only a written text like a book or something, right? But no, there's visual text. You're driving down the highway, you see a billboard, you can kind of deconstruct that, so to speak. Not literally, you'll get in trouble for that, right? Don't take it apart. But if you look up at a billboard and you're like, there's that guy, he's a famous football player, and he didn't used to have any hair, and now he does, and they're selling, like hair products or whatever. What's that? I wonder how much he's getting paid for that. And da da da. So you can use textual analysis on a visual, like a billboard, or written text, of course, a film, music. You can look at your favorite song lyrics and take those apart and try to understand them. And again, there's a little bit more about this in the book, and then I'll bring this up a couple more times as we go throughout the semester. But I want to move on a little bit now and talk about when we are persuading someone, or when someone's persuading us. There are three things that we can really look at. The book does a good job of mentioning, it gives a summary of each one of these on pages 34, 35, and then 43 and 44. It talks about these, what are called major appeals. And again, if these words look kind of funny, it's because they go back to ancient Greece, ethos, pathos, and ethos, logos, and pathos. And these are our major appeals. In other words, when you're trying to persuade somebody, if you can use a little bit of each of these, it can really make your persuasion a little more effective, a little richer. Do we have to use all of them all the time? No, probably not, but you can decide. So when you're looking at this first one, I'm going to cover these three, and that's about all we're going to do for this lecture today. Just get a little bit of a taste of these today, and then we'll talk about them throughout the semester. I may ask you, in this paper, maybe you could add a little more to your ethos. In other words, as a reader, when you're trying to figure out someone's ethos, you're trying to figure out how's a writer trying to establish common ground with me as a reader, and how are they demonstrating that they know about this topic? Because we tend to believe people if we think that they know what they're talking about, right? And some people are just really good, I think, at convincing others that they know what they're talking about. Maybe they do, maybe they don't, but they have a knack for convincing people. We might also look at, if we're reading a text, we might look at the biographical information of the writer. So if somebody has a background in microbiology and we're reading a paper about microbiology, well, we might be more likely to believe them. So again, this ethos idea it's kind of related to ethics or ethical. And it has this idea of we trust this person. And so if you're trying to write as a writer, you want to get trust from your audience. Try to show goodwill towards your audience. So, there are a lot of different ways to do that, but some of it's just the tone, the way that you write. Trying to write carefully and clearly is a way of showing goodwill, I think, to the audience, because you're basically saying, I'm going to try to communicate clearly to respect you. So it's sort of, as a writer, you might try to show goodwill. We might even want to say the word respect. You might show respect for your audience. And that's a good way to build ethos, meaning they trust you, they like you, they believe you, and so they want to read on. Establish a good sense of knowledge of the subject. So somewhere, when you write your essay, Hills Like White Elephants, one way to build your ethos is to just summarize Hemingway's story. Just to say, this is a story about a man and a woman, they're at a train station, and the reader is like, oh, okay, they know what they're talking about. I believe them, I trust them, I'm going to listen. Demonstrate good character. This is hard to do in writing, but not impossible. And a lot of it is just like the language you choose. Now, obviously, if you have a lot of words that begin with F and they're 4 letters in your paper, you're not going to do that. I know, I'm just joking. But if you did, maybe use some off colors, you have to be careful with it. So you have to decide, is this really, I want to share this story, but it's kind of offensive in a way. Is it going to help my message enough that I need to leave it in? Or is it going to wreck my ethos, basically? In other words, it's going to cause me to seem not believable or trustworthy. So again, ethos is all about whether you're a reader or a writer. It's all about this, how do you look as a trustworthy, believable person. And that's what you're trying to establish as a writer of an essay, right? And even using good grammar can build your ethos. Because it's like when somebody sends in a resume, and I used to be in a job where I hired a lot of people, and when I would see a resume, and I'm an English teacher too, so that made it doubly worse. But when I would see, a resume that has a lot of typos, spelling mistakes, different, even the formatting, right away I would kind of push that resume away. And maybe that's unfair, but it does happen a lot. And that's because of ethos, right? It's the person's not showing kind of that they're careful, that they're thoughtful, at least in their writing. They may be the most careful, thoughtful person in the world, but it didn't come across. And that's an example of how ethos can be really important, even in real world situations where writing is involved. All right, so we get two more. The next one, so this is ethos again, how we might use it. It's an ethical appeal. Somebody might say, as a doctor, I'm qualified. As a Marine, I know how to handle this emergency situation. Or you know me, we've been in Sunday school together. I babysat your kids, so I think I'd be great for this job, or whatever it is, playground director. But ethos is where, again, I'm believable, I'm trustworthy, and that helps you believe my writing. Logos is probably the most important one for academic writing because it looks, logos to me it means the word, I think, literally, but from Greek, but it really looks like the word logic. So when you're writing for academic things, whether it's a history class or a biology class even, or an English class for sure, you want to appear logical. And so the best way to do that as a reader, you might start looking for good reasons. So you're reading this paper, they're trying to persuade you about something. Do they have good reasons? That's probably the most, number one thing. Also, as a writer, you want to do that too and give evidence. And does it seem trustworthy, effective? This word judicious, does it seem like something that they have good judgment? As a writer, you want to demonstrate that you have good reasoning skills. Now, the best way to show that you have good reasoning skills in writing is to write an argument or to organize your paper in a way that's sort of easy to follow. And if it's all over the place and confusing, the reader might read it and think, they're not being logical. Even if your reasons are great, if they're not presented well, it could damage your logos. So in other words, it sounds like I'm talking about some medical procedure here, right? But this idea of logos, it could make you seem not logical. And that can make your argument seem not believable. And in some classes, in some cases, depending on the professor, obviously it would downgrade your paper in terms of the grade. Definitely in an English class, but I think other professors too do care about writing. I know my son's in a history class in high school right now, and I think his history teacher's one of the toughest writing teachers I've ever encountered, because I've actually looked at some of his homework assignments that he's been doing. And so, you just never know where you're going to encounter someone who really cares about this sort of logical arrangement of ideas. I'm sure you've seen that before in other classes, whether in high school or college, not only in English classes. But that's logos, that idea of just, presenting good reasons and organizing it so you show that you have good reasoning skills and that you can support your ideas, and that builds your logo. So again, you can see how if you do all these things, you have ethos, you're trustworthy, you show that you're somebody who's believable, you show that you're logical, and then finally, well, here's a couple of examples of logos. Logos again is something that here we are in the courtroom over here, and he's saying, ladies and gentlemen of the jury, we have the fingerprints, we have a video, all this evidence, so we've got to convict this person, right? And so this is logical, good reasons. That's the main thing that we look at with logos. All right, pathos is the last one. Now, a lot of people would say pathos has no place at all in academic or writing for school, but I disagree. I think it does have a place, but it's going to be less than logos. If you're writing a paper and you have no logical reasoning in that paper, obviously that's not going to be a good paper for academics. You could probably leave out emotion, still get a good grade, but it can really add a lot if you do it right. And I think of pathos, again, if you look at the word pathos, has this root path. Path is like sympathy, empathy, pathetic, all these words that have to do with feelings, right? So emotional appeal is pathos. So you have these appeals, you can be logical, you can show that you're believable and trustworthy, and you can also show emotion. We might use the word passion, might be better than emotion, because emotion sounds like you're getting angry or being immature sometimes maybe, but maybe passion is a better way of saying this. But as a reader, you might look for language designed to stir your emotions. Now, I would be suspicious if somebody uses too much pathos, like if somebody's just trying to get me all emotional, that. Like sometimes I've been in that position where I felt like salespeople or television commercials or something, internet ads were trying to get me emotional to sell me something. So that's when I want to be kind of a little bit on the defensive as a reader. Attempts to build connections. So they want to show shared values and connections. And you see this if you look at TV commercials, if you listen to politicians ever speak, they're trying to build these shared connections. And often they use a lot of emotion, not much logic, and maybe a little bit of their reputation, but pathos can be too heavy sometimes, and that can be a bad thing. And that makes me suspicious. So that's something to look for when you're reading a paper. If there's a little too much emotion, that might be a red flag. Like maybe they don't have a very strong argument. That's why they're using so much emotion. As a writer, when you're writing papers, try to engage the feelings of your audience, but don't manipulate them, especially when you're writing a more personal essay. Like if your professor asks you to tell a story about your life to illustrate a point or something, then you can definitely bring in feelings, emotions, and things like that. You want to establish empathy. In other words, this idea that you kind of relate to your audience, whoever's reading your paper, and then show that you authentically understand. So again, these are examples. This is sort of an overview of pathos, and these are examples. It's again an emotional appeal. So there are times when it works just fine. Like here's an example. You imagine they're in a dangerous situation, and somebody says, if we don't move, we're all going to die. Can't you see how dangerous it would be to stay? So in that case, I think pathos is really appropriate, right? We got to get out of this, building is falling or whatever. Or maybe I'm not just invested in this community. I love every building, every business, every hardworking member of this town. Notice they use the word love. Love is generally not an unemotional word. It's almost hard to use the word love and not have some pathos or some emotion. And then down here at the bottom, we're complimenting somebody. That's another time where we often have a lot of emotion. You'll make the right decision because you have something that not many people do. You have heart. So this is telling somebody they have this quality that's important, and just the underline, the red part rather, you can see is kind of an emotional part, and that's where we're using pathos. But again, pathos is an emotional appeal, and all three of these can be good in the right situation. So let's take a moment to finish up today with our rhetoric lecture, and if you can, I've got A, B, and C, and I'm going to give you three instances of somebody using rhetoric, trying to use language effectively and with a purpose, right? And see if you can decide if it's an example of ethos, pathos, and logos. And what you might want to do after I read each one, you might pause the video and think about it for just a minute. Is it ethos? Is it pathos, or is it logos? So letter A, private demand for the product has tapered off for the past 3 years, and this year's sales figures are at an all-time low. It's time to research other options. So this could be maybe in a sales meeting, a big company or something, right? And they're in this meeting and they're trying to decide, the product, we're not selling a lot of these anymore. Something's going on. We need to look at other options. So when the person says the sales are low and this year's sales figures are at an all-time low, we need to do something else. Are they using ethos, their reputation? Are they using emotion? Or are they using logic to try to get somebody to, make a change to their strategy, their marketing strategy, or whatever it might be? So that's letter A, ethos, pathos, logos. I'll come back and tell you which is which in just a minute, or what I think they are. Better men than us have fought and died to preserve this great nation. Now is our turn to return the favor. You might have to scream this, but I'm not going to scream in your ear. Don't worry. For God and country, gentlemen, with an exclamation mark, right? So we're charging into battle. We're in the foxhole. We're hunkered down. We're like, we got to go now. Let's go. I don't just say, hey, I think we should get out of here. But, we say it in a little more excited way here. So B, is it ethos? Are they using their reputation? Pathos, using emotion, or logos, using logic? And finally, the last letter C, he's a forensics and ballistics expert for the federal government. If anyone's qualified to determine the murder weapon, it's him. So again, we've got three here. If you want to pause the video, and I'll tell you, I think one is each. There's one of each. And decide if you think these are examples of ethos, pathos, or logos. Remember, ethos is reputation or character, we might call it. It's ethics. It's you trust me, you believe me. Pathos is emotion, and logos is logic. So if you want to pause, if I had the Jeopardy music, I could do that. And then we'll come back. So A, if you did pause or if you thought about it for a moment, you might have already decided A is logical, right? We're not selling any of this stuff. We better change our marketing. Our jobs depend on this. And it could be emotional, but they don't state it in that way, right? They're just like, we're not selling many of these. We got to figure this out. So that's a logical ask, I think. Somebody's asking them logically. reasonably. Notice the exclamation mark that kind of gives it away, and we're in battle, it looks like. We're getting ready to go out and for God and country, gentlemen. It's like charge, basically the word charge, right? That's pathos, that's emotion. You don't really like logically charge, probably. You're not, I mean, maybe some people, but mostly I think people would inspire somebody with emotion to do something heroic in battle or something like that. Letter C. He's a forensics and ballistics expert for the federal government. Now, this might have been confused with logos. When I first looked at it, I thought logos, but it's logical. Yeah, he's a good person. But it's really more about ethos because he's an expert. Let's listen to him. If you ever watch any of those CSI type programs, right? They don't have just some random guy doing the ballistics. It's a ballistics expert, right? And so that expert status is often connected to ethos. In academic reading, when somebody says they're a professor of geology and they're talking about geology or geometry or some other science or math class, you're more likely to believe them because they have a background in that. And that's where we come into ethos. That's why people put initials after their name. People have a master's or a PhD or whatever, and they put that, or a psychologist or whatever it might be. Those little initials are really all about ethos. They're basically saying, I have this qualification, and you can trust me, you can believe me. All right, so we will stop there for today. But again, this was our rhetoric lecture talking about these three appeals: ethos, pathos, and logos. These will come up on a later quiz. And again, here are the page numbers if you want to look back in the Harbrace book and see a little bit more information about these. And then we also talked about textual analysis, and you can see again the page numbers, page 30 to 31, talk about critical reading and textual analysis as well, all parts of academic reading. So thanks for watching this. I hope you got through it. And if you have any questions, feel free to send me an email. And again, this will come up later, probably on one of our quizzes, but I'm also going to ask you about it and encourage you to use maybe 2 or more of these in each paper. Try to use emotion, try to use logic, of course, how you organize your paper, and try to use, and good reasons. And then also, where you can, use ethos. A lot of times ethos is used by bringing in an outside source and quoting somebody who's an expert on your topic. So hopefully this wasn't too confusing and you got something out of it. And I will see you in the reading lecture, or I'll see you in office hours. Thanks.